Have you ever wondered why the man who walks away is often the one no one can forget? It sounds backwards, doesn't it? We're taught that if you truly love someone, you should hold on tighter, fight harder, never give up. But what if that belief is exactly what keeps so many men trapped in relationships where they are no longer respected? The uncomfortable truth is this: power doesn't belong to the person who needs to be loved. It belongs to the person who refuses to betray himself just to keep someone from leaving. The man who dares to walk away isn't heartless. He simply understands something most people spend a lifetime learning. No relationship is worth losing your dignity, your peace, or your purpose. And strangely enough, the moment he chooses himself, the entire dynamic begins to change. Hello everyone, welcome to the Magnetic Masculinity channel. In this video, you'll discover why walking away isn't a sign of weakness. It's often the ultimate expression of strength, self-respect, and emotional freedom. More importantly, you'll learn why the man who can leave is often the man who holds the greatest power, even when he says nothing at all. Now let's get started. Part 1. The man who can leave is the man who cannot be controlled. Most people think power comes from having more money, more status, or more influence. But life teaches a different lesson. Real power begins the moment you no longer fear losing what was never meant to define you. Think about it. Why do so many intelligent, capable men stay in relationships that slowly drain their confidence? Why do they tolerate disrespect, broken promises, emotional games, and constant uncertainty? The answer is almost never love. It is fear. The fear of starting over. The fear of being alone, the fear that no one else will ever choose them again. And fear has a dangerous habit. It convinces a man to accept what he once promised himself he never would. One compromise becomes another. One ignored boundary becomes a new normal. One apology turns into a lifetime of silent resentment. Little by little, he stops recognizing the man he used to be. Not because someone stole his strength, but because he surrendered it one decision at a time. The truth is, control doesn't begin with commands. It begins with dependence. The moment your happiness depends entirely on someone else's presence, you unknowingly hand them the power to shape your emotions. Your mood rises when they text. It falls when they disappear. Your confidence grows when they approve of you. It collapses when they withdraw their attention. Without realizing it, you've given another person access to the steering wheel of your life, and the greatest prison is the one built without walls. A man who can walk away lives differently. He still loves. He still cares. He still commits wholeheartedly. But he never forgets one essential truth. His identity existed before the relationship, and it will continue to exist after it. That realization changes everything, because when a man knows he can survive loss, rejection no longer controls him. He stops negotiating his principles for temporary comfort. He stops explaining his worth to people determined not to see it. He stops chasing those who keep reminding him that he isn't enough. Instead, he quietly protects the one thing no one else can protect for him: his self-respect. Ironically, this is the moment his presence becomes stronger. Not because he became cold, not because he learned manipulation, but because he is no longer making decisions from fear. He is making them from conviction. And there is something undeniably powerful about a man whose peace cannot be purchased and whose dignity cannot be negotiated. Because the man who is willing to walk away from what destroys his soul is the man who can never truly be controlled. Part 2. The moment you stop needing approval, you become unstoppable. There is a question every man should ask himself at least once in his life. Who am I trying so hard to impress? For many, the answer is uncomfortable. A woman, a family, friends, society, or perhaps a younger version of themselves that still believes their worth must be earned. This is how the trap begins. A man slowly starts measuring his value through other people's reactions. If she smiles, he feels confident. If she pulls away, he questions himself. If she praises him, he feels strong. If she criticizes him, he begins changing who he is. Without realizing it, his identity becomes a mirror held in someone else's hands. And that is one of the most dangerous places a man can live. Because the moment another person controls how you see yourself, they also control how you live. You begin speaking more carefully than honestly. You avoid difficult conversations just to keep the peace. You suppress your dreams because you're afraid someone might disapprove. You become a version of yourself designed to be accepted, not respected. But acceptance bought through self-betrayal always comes at a painful price. Sooner or later, you look in the mirror and realize you've become a stranger to yourself. You smile when you're exhausted. You agree when your heart says no. You stay when every part of your soul is asking you to leave. This is not love. This is emotional dependence disguised as loyalty. The man who holds real power understands something very few people ever do. Approval is temporary. Character is permanent. He doesn't wake up every morning wondering how to make everyone like him. He asks a far more important question. Did I remain true to myself today? That question changes the direction of his entire life. Because a man who lives by his principles cannot be manipulated by praise, and he cannot be destroyed by criticism. He listens, he reflects, he learns, but he never abandons his values just to make someone else comfortable. Ironically, this is exactly what earns genuine respect. People trust those who know who they are. They feel safe around those who don't change personalities to fit every room they enter. A woman may disagree with such a man. She may challenge him. She may even walk away. But deep inside, she recognizes something she rarely encounters. A man who refuses to negotiate his identity. That kind of confidence doesn't need to announce itself. It is felt in the way he speaks, in the way he walks, in the way he remains calm when others panic. Because his strength doesn't come from controlling people. It comes from mastering himself. And once a man no longer depends on approval to feel valuable, he becomes almost impossible to control. Not because he has become harder to love, but because he has finally learned that his worth was never something another person had the authority to decide. Before we go any further, pause for just a second. Ask yourself this one question. Have you ever stayed somewhere you had already outgrown, simply because you were afraid to walk away? If your answer is yes, you're not alone. Leave a simple, "I choose self-respect," in the comments below. Not for me, not for anyone else, but as a quiet commitment to the man you're becoming. And if these conversations about strength, discipline, emotional freedom, and timeless Stoic wisdom resonate with you, consider subscribing to the channel. Because every week, we explore the lessons that most men learn too late, but you don't have to. Now, let's continue because the next lesson may completely change the way you understand power, respect, and the courage to walk away. Part 3. Walking away is not giving up. It's knowing when to stop betraying yourself. There is a moment in every man's life that changes him forever. Not the day he falls in love, not the day he succeeds, not even the day he experiences heartbreak. It is the day he finally realizes some battles are only destroying the person fighting them. Many men spend years believing that endurance is always a virtue. They stay longer. They forgive more. They sacrifice again and again. They tell themselves, if I just love harder, if I become more patient, if I prove myself one more time, everything will change. But some doors never open. No matter how gently you knock, some people don't fail to appreciate you because you lacked value. They fail because they were never capable of seeing it. And the longer you try to convince someone of your worth, the more you begin questioning it yourself. That is the hidden cost of chasing what refuses to choose you. You don't just lose time, you slowly lose your identity. You begin shrinking your dreams to fit someone else's comfort. You silence your opinions to avoid another argument. You ignore your intuition because facing the truth feels more painful than living the lie. Eventually, you wake up one morning and realize you're surviving a life that no longer feels like your own. That is why walking away is not an act of anger. It is an act of awakening. It is the moment a man finally says, I refuse to keep paying for love with pieces of my soul. People often misunderstand this kind of strength. They assume the man who leaves stopped caring. In reality, he cared so deeply that he finally recognized the one person he had neglected for far too long: himself. There is a profound difference between giving up on someone and giving up on the version of yourself that keeps accepting less than you deserve. The first comes from disappointment, the second comes from wisdom. Wisdom teaches you that love without respect eventually becomes emotional exhaustion. Loyalty without boundaries becomes self-destruction. Patience without progress becomes suffering. And hope without action becomes a prison. A truly powerful man understands that peace is not found by winning every argument or saving every relationship. Peace is found by knowing when to stop fighting battles that demand the sacrifice of your dignity. That is why he can walk away without hatred, without revenge, without trying to prove anyone wrong. Because his departure is not about punishment, it is about freedom. He no longer needs the last word. He no longer needs someone to admit they were wrong. He no longer needs validation to justify his decision. His silence says everything his words no longer need to explain. And that silence carries more power than 1,000 desperate conversations, because the strongest goodbye is never spoken with bitterness. It is spoken with calm, with clarity, and with the quiet confidence of a man who finally understands the greatest relationship he will ever build is the one he has with himself. Part 4. The man who fears nothing is the man who can leave anything. Have you ever noticed that the strongest people rarely threaten to leave? They simply do. No dramatic speeches, no endless arguments, no desperate attempts to be understood. Because they learned one of life's hardest truths. When someone repeatedly shows you who they are, believing them is not cruelty, it is wisdom. Weakness keeps asking for one more explanation. Strength quietly accepts reality. This doesn't mean a powerful man never feels pain. He does. He feels rejection. He feels disappointment. He feels the weight of lonely nights and unanswered questions. The difference is, he refuses to let pain make his decisions. Most men don't stay because they are deeply in love. They stay because they are deeply attached. And attachment is often mistaken for love. Love wants the best for both people. Attachment fears losing what it depends on. Love gives freely. Attachment clings desperately. Love creates peace. Attachment creates anxiety. When you cannot imagine life without someone, you slowly give them authority over your emotions. You become afraid to speak honestly, afraid to set boundaries, afraid to disappoint them, afraid they'll leave. Ironically, that fear becomes the very thing that destroys the relationship, because fear changes a man's behavior. He begins overthinking every conversation. He apologizes before expressing his needs. He tolerates disrespect just to avoid conflict. He accepts less than he deserves because he believes something imperfect is better than being alone. But every time he betrays himself to avoid losing someone else, he loses a little more of the man he was meant to become. Eventually, there is nothing left to protect, nothing left to respect. That is why emotionally mature men understand a simple principle. Anything that costs your integrity is already too expensive. Whether it is a relationship, a friendship, a job, and he discovered something unexpected on the other side. He wasn't empty. He wasn't broken. He wasn't incomplete. He was finally free. Free to build a meaningful life. Free to choose relationships instead of needing them. Free to say no without guilt. Free to walk away without hatred. And once a man tastes that kind of freedom, he never again mistakes dependence for love. He understands that true power has never been the ability to hold on. It has always been the courage to let go of anything that asks him to abandon himself. Part 5. In the end, power belongs to the man who can lose everything and still remain himself. If you've stayed with me until this moment, you've probably realized something important. This video was never really about leaving a woman. It was about leaving behind the version of yourself that lived in fear. The version that begged for acceptance. The version that confused attention with love. the version that believed happiness could only exist if someone else decided to stay, that man will always feel powerless because his future is permanently tied to decisions he cannot control. But the man who discovers his own worth lives by a different set of rules. He understands that every relationship is a choice, not a necessity. He loves without chains. He commits without losing his identity. He gives his heart without surrendering his principles. That is the kind of strength that cannot be taken away. Life will test every man, sometimes through failure, sometimes through betrayal, sometimes through silence so deep that it forces him to confront every insecurity he has tried to escape. Those moments feel unbearable, but they also reveal the truth. Not about other people, about yourself. Because hardship strips away every illusion. It exposes whether your confidence was built on applause or on character. When your identity is built on your values instead of your circumstances, life becomes far less frightening. You stop asking, "What if I lose her?" and begin asking, "What kind of man do I want to become?" That single question changes every decision you make. You become more disciplined, more patient, more honest, more selective about who earns access to your time, your energy, and your heart. Not because your heart has become colder, but because your standards have become healthier. You realize that protecting your peace is not selfish. It is necessary. You realize that saying goodbye is sometimes the highest form of self-respect. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally learned the difference between fighting for love and fighting against your own dignity. Remember this: the man who fears losing everyone will spend his life chasing. The man who values his soul above his comfort will spend his life choosing. Choosing peace over chaos. Choosing purpose over approval. Choosing growth over attachment. And choosing self-respect over temporary affection. That is the man who sleeps peacefully at night. That is the man who cannot be manipulated. That is the man who never needs to prove his strength, because his life proves it for him. In the end, real power is not measured by how many people stay. It is measured by whether you can look in the mirror after every difficult decision and still recognize the man staring back at you. Because the greatest victory a man will ever achieve is not holding on to someone who was determined to leave. It is never letting go of himself. Conclusion. The greatest power a man can possess is not the power to make someone stay. It is the strength to walk away without losing his character. Because the moment you stop fearing loss, you stop living as a prisoner of other people's choices. Remember this: never chase where you are merely tolerated. Never sacrifice your peace to keep a relationship alive. And never trade your dignity for temporary affection. Choose a life built on purpose, discipline, and self-respect. When you become a man who values his principles more than his comfort, you'll discover that real power was never about controlling others. It was always about mastering yourself. If this message resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and join us on this journey of stoicism, emotional resilience, and personal growth. Every video is created to help you become wiser, stronger, and more at peace with yourself. Thank you for taking the time to watch until the end of the video. See you in the next videos.